Hi everyone, I'm Xiao Fu. I'm really happy to introduce our paper, Evaluating the Cranfield Paradigm for Conversational Search Systems. This is a joint work with Emily Elmas and Aldo Libani. In this study, our main objective is to answer the questions. Can we trust indirect assessments as we trust direct assessment when evaluating conversational search systems? And can we predict user satisfaction from conversational patterns? In this presentation, I will start with a short introduction, where I will present the research questions. After that, I will explain how we gathered and built the data sets, and discuss the result and the findings of this study. Let's start with the Cranfield paradigm. The Cranfield paradigm describes the offline of evaluation of search engines. It was first performed by Cyril Clifton, and Cranfield refers to the university where it was first run. The offline evaluation of a search engine requires a test connection, which includes a set of documents, a set of queries, and a set of relevance judgments. It also needs the definition of an effectiveness measure. Together, these components serve as a standard measure for testing retrieval approaches. The building of a test connection normally requires the relevance assessor to judge whether a document is relevant or not relevant in random order. The procedure assumes that the judgment of these assessors, which we call indirect assessors, because they look at the documents and they are not using the retrieval system, correlate with the judgment of the assessors using the retrieval systems, which we call the direct assessors. Another thing we should keep in mind is the difference between information retrieval system and conversational search systems. Here, in the left-hand side, it is a case of web search where user input a query and get a ranked list of documents as a response. While in the right-hand side is an example of intelligent assistant, where users will interact with the system in a more natural way. These two different ways of interaction bring many issues when we evaluate conversational search systems in a standard information retrieval way. First, we cannot only focus on query level, since a significant difference is that conversational search systems rely on the context. We cannot disregard the context of the conversation. Second, dialogue-based interaction brings more possibilities. For example, wrong results may be lethal in traditional information retrieval, but in conversational search systems, user can ask follow-up questions to seek better response. These are the research questions of this study. The first research question is what is the agreement between the direct and the indirect assessment of conversational satisfaction? To answer this question, we need to quantify the agreement in terms of user satisfaction between a user who performing the search task, which we call direct assessment, and a user observing the search task, which we call the indirect assessment. This is fundamental in order to understand if we can rely on indirect assessment in order to evaluate simulated conversations. The second research question is how does the agreement between direct and indirect assessment change when we follow a standard Cranfield paradigm but in a conversational setting? In a standard Cranfield, indirect assessment are used to evaluate whether a document is relevant to a given topic. In a conversational setting, we can do the same by assessing the relevance of the returned document at each turn of the conversation. This is fundamental in order to understand if the relevance perceived by the users and the assessors are congruent. Finally, can we predict conversational satisfaction from conversational patterns? In this analysis, we aim to analyze several conversational patterns to predict conversational satisfaction. For example, are users satisfied when the results are somewhat relevant across the whole conversation, or users are more satisfied if the last few terms are relevant? These patterns are fundamental in order to get the design of more reliable metrics. To answer these research questions, we used two datasets, one for direct assessment and one for indirect assessment of the same conversational search system. The direct assessments come from a previous study titled How Am I Doing? Evaluating Conversational Search System Offline. In that study, users are asked to interact with a conversational search system and judge if the response is relevant at each turn. And finally, they should provide a user satisfaction assessment. For the indirect assessments, we performed a crowdsourcing task on Amazon Mechanic Turk, where participants need to read the conversations from the direct assessment, and they will be asked to do the same judgment at each term, and also provide a final user satisfaction assessment. These are the results and the findings for research question 1. On the left-hand side, we have the table where we picked three different satisfaction agreement coefficients: the Cranfield alpha, the Randolph kappa, and the Cohen's kappa. This table shows the scores in different types and groupings, where we found this there is a certain agreement among direct assessment and a stronger agreement among indirect assessment. This means users experiencing the conversational search system agree much less than users observing the systems. Second, the direct versus indirect assessment is higher than the direct assessment alone, which means the indirect procedure is capable of capturing fair satisfaction scores. For research question 2, we calculate those three agreement coefficients on turn relevance. The table shows the result. The result shows that there is a certain agreement among indirect and a stronger agreement when comparing with the direct assessment. That indicates a difference between judging relevance and satisfaction. That is, assessors agree more about conversational satisfaction than turn relevance. To answer research question 3, we picked 7 different predictors shown in the table. They are the numbers of turns, the last non-relevant reply, the last reply, at least 2 non-relevant replies in sequence, the ratio of non-relevant replies, normalized ranked biased precision, as known as NRBP, and the inverse NRBP. We also calculate the 3 correlation coefficients for them. They are Spearman's rank, Pearson's rho, and Kendall's tau. In the brackets is the rank of the coefficients in absolute value. Here, we found that the strongest predictors are the ratio of non-relevant reply, the inverse NRBP, the presence of at least the 2 non-relevant reply, and the NRBP. We also found that almost all predictors consistent across two types of assessment, except the length, which seems to play a more critical role in direct assessment. We also performed logistic regression to fit these two assessments. The first table shows the performance of two models, and the second table shows the weights and the ranks of them. We found that direct assessment are better than indirect assessment in predicting satisfaction. Moreover, we observed that the performance of the model trained and tested on indirect assessment, which is the last row, is higher than the model is trained and tested in direct one, which is the first row, on every metric. This may be due to a higher agreement on conversational satisfaction we observed in indirect assessment than direct assessment. In the second table, we observe that the most important feature is the length of the conversation. However, this shows an opposite behavior across two models, indicating that the length oppositely influences assessors, and the other most important features are the ratio of non-relevance documents, the NRBP, and the presence of at least two non-relevance replies. These behave similar across the two models. In conclusion, there is a strong agreement when evaluating conversational satisfaction rather than turn relevance. There is a fair agreement across two types of assessment in both conversational satisfaction and turn relevance. The length of the conversation has a contrasting behavior across the two types of assessment, negatively in direct one and positively in indirect one. Our study shows the recency effect. The user's satisfaction scores are influenced negatively by the presence of non-relevance results. And our study also shows the anchoring effect, which is users' satisfaction scores are influenced by their initial relevance results. Thanks.